America suffers from what I call the Axis of Indoctrination, Hollywood, media, and academia. And Angela Davis, the communist, is a prime player in the Axis of Indoctrination when it comes to academia. She's a longtime professor here in California. Back in 2006, she came to UC Davis and gave a speech. Now, when you look at people like AOC and the other squad members, think about it. They were teenagers when Angela Davis said things like this.
Of course, we need to tell Arnold Schwarzenegger that the prison situation is horrendous. And California is at the very bottom of the list. 2.2 million people are behind bars, which means that the United States incarcerates proportionately more people than any other country in the world.
So that means Angela Davis believes the figures coming out of Cuba, where they've had political prisoners for decades. She believes the figures given to us by the governments of North Korea, where they've had at least 2 million Uyghurs in concentration camps. She believes the figures coming out of Iran, a state sponsor of terrorism. Wow. Now, let's just say she's not a fan of Republicans.
And, I can't get started talking about Schwarzenegger. God. I do a lot of traveling. And I travel in Europe and Latin America and other places, and people said, George Bush and Arnold Schwarzenegger in California? They said, that's even worse than Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan.
Oh, that racist Ronald Reagan, who got 14% of the black vote in 1980. We haven't seen that higher percentage since then for Republicans. Oh, that Ronald Reagan, who only got reelected 49 states to 1. And let's just say that Ms. Davis is not a fan of individualism and managed to slam Condoleezza Rice in the same process.
There is this dangerous individualism to which I referred earlier, not unrelated to the individualism of capitalism, possessive individualism, and this dangerous individualism is bound to transform the collective victories that we win. And so if we imagine these victories as community victories, and they are transformed into individual victories, then we seek out heroic examples. We seek out individuals like Condoleezza Rice, who narrates her own history from the segregation and discrimination of the pre-civil rights era, or the civil rights era in the South. She's also from Birmingham, Alabama, by the way, but that's not something I want to boast about. And what happens is that we forget about the structural changes that were actually intended by those struggles. A Condoleezza Rice can say, well, look where I am. Look what I accomplished. I was a little black girl in Birmingham, Alabama, and and now I'm running around the world making war.
Elder here for Birch Gold. As one of the top dealers of physical precious metals in the United States, Birch Gold Group helps Americans diversify their savings with gold and silver. Customers can purchase for physical possession or convert a portion of their IRA or 401k into an IRA backed by physical precious metals. And for the first time since Obama's first term, we are facing a democratically controlled White House, Senate, and House. Sounds like a lot of tax and spending to me. Get ready for more so-called quantitative easing. Now, how does that affect your investment? How does that affect the strength of your portfolio? So, contact Birch Gold Group to request a free info kit on physical precious metals. See if diversifying into gold makes sense for you. This comprehensive 20-page kit reveals how gold and silver can protect your savings and how you can legally move your IRA or 401k out of risky stocks and bonds into a precious metals IRA. To get your no-cost, no-obligation kit, text Larry to 474747. That's text Larry to 474747. Now, as I mentioned, squad members would have been teenagers when Angela Davis gave her speech, and one of them, Ayanna Pressley, pretty much echoes what she said. There's only one way to be black, only one way to be brown, and that is to think the way I think.
If you are not prepared to come to that table and to represent that voice, don't come. Because we don't need any more brown faces that don't want to be a brown voice. We don't need black faces that don't want to be a black voice. We don't need Muslims that don't want to be a Muslim voice. We don't need queers that don't want to be a queer voice. And if you're worried about being marginalized and stereotyped, please don't even show up. Because we need you to represent that voice.
And role model Angela Davis had a few things to say about diversity.
So I want to just choose one example, contemporary example, and it's that word diversity. You know, it upsets me. It really upsets me. Not that I don't believe that we should have diversity, but the word diversity has colonized so much of what we were once able to talk with much greater specificity. All we have to do now is evoke diversity. And what does diversity mean? It means, I guess this would be a diverse audience. Because there are different kinds of people, at least, well, I don't know whether they're really different kinds of people. There's a kind of visual effect, you know? And diversity is precisely about that visual effect. It does not necessarily tell us, and I'm not an opponent of diversity. I'm an advocate of strong conceptions of diversity. And the way I summarize it is that you can have difference that truly makes a difference, and that's the kind of diversity I want, difference that is going to make a difference. But you can also have difference that doesn't make a difference. Difference that allows this machine to keep functioning in the same old way. And as a matter of fact, sometimes even more efficiently and effectively. I mean, George Bush is so proud of the fact that his Secretary of State is a black woman. And I would tell some stories about that, but if we embrace weak notions of diversity, it is a concept that promotes, it seems to me, a hidden individualization of problems and solutions that ought to be collective.
So, Ms. Davis likes diversity as long as the diversity does not produce any diverse views. Never mind what this gentleman said about there being more than one way to be black.
One of the great changes that's occurred in our country since I was your age is the realization there's no one way to be black.
You got more questions, but I tell you, if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, then you ain't black.
And this brings us to socialism, something that would have worked had it not been thwarted, said Angela Davis. You see, socialist countries were going fine until the dastardly capitalists came in and thwarted it.
I wanted to say something about the thwarted efforts of socialism in Eastern Europe. I mean, it's like we've completely forgotten that there were these countries that call themselves communists, the word only comes up when North Korea decides that it wants to challenge the US, right? And then it's a communist country, right? Or when Fidel Castro or the people of Cuba stand up to George Bush, and it's like communist Cuba. But what we don't hold in our historical memory is that despite whatever problems may have existed in those countries, despite the fact that they failed to produce social democracy, they failed to produce political democracy, that they made amazing changes with respect to people's lives. I mean, I had a friend years ago a young white woman from this country who was on welfare, and she made a trip to the Soviet Union. And she actually wanted to get a university education, but couldn't because she was on welfare and had a child and all of that. So, I mean, this is an individual solution, of course. So she actually decided to move to Moscow. And she ended up, at that time, I'll never forget, she was like just so amazed. She said, you know, my rent is practically nothing. I have free child care. I can get a free college education. And when she finished her undergraduate education, she decided to go on and get her PhD. And then she's still there. She stayed. But, you know, free health care. The health care system is in such a crisis in this country. And free education. And the idea that people had was that not only should education be free, but students should actually be supported, financially supported, while they're acquiring the knowledge which they will later give back to society.
Again, not a fan of capitalism, which he feels that America imposes on the world in the guise of democracy.
It occurred to me that if you listen to Bush say democracy, just replace that with capitalism. I mean, it makes a lot more sense. The strategies make a lot more sense, because it's not really about democracy.
Wow. Just wow.
While there are some great corporations trying to do the right thing, in my view, and I say this very seriously, the greed of the billionaire class, the greed, this is not supposed to be funny. I say this very seriously. The greed of the billionaire class, the greed of Wall Street is destroying the lives of millions of Americans. Close quote. What do we make of that?
It's astonishing, but I think even more astonishing is how many people voted for Bernie Sanders at a time where in socialist Venezuela, people are starving. They're breaking into stores in their desperation to get some food. They're crossing the borders into other countries to stave off starvation. In a country that has one of the world's largest supplies of oil, that they've managed to do that in that country. And people are so utterly insulated from facts that the fact that Bernie Sanders paints a very beautiful picture is all that matters.
And I think that the honourable gentleman knows that I have the same contempt for his socialist policies as the people of East Europe who have experienced it have it for theirs. I think I must have hit the right nail on the head when I pointed out that the logic of those policies are they'd rather have the poor poorer. Once they start to talk about the gap, they'd rather the gap was that. Down here. That. Not that. for that. So long as the gap is smaller, they'd rather have the poor poorer. You do not create wealth and opportunity that way. You do not create a property-owning democracy that way.
Now, it's hard to get more left-wing than rocker Bono, who after years and years of charitable activity realized something.
So some of Africa is rising and some of Africa is stuck. The question is whether the rising bit will pull the rest of Africa up or whether the other Africa will weigh the continent down. Which will it be? Stakes here aren't just about them. Imagine for a second this last global recession, but without the economic growth of China and India, without the hundreds of millions of newly minted middle-class folks who now buy American and European goods. Imagine that. Think about the last 5 years. Rockstar preaches capitalism. Wow. Sometimes I hear myself and I just can't believe it. But commerce is real. That's what you're about here. It's real. Aid is just a stopgap. Commerce, entrepreneurial capitalism takes more people out of poverty than aid. Of course, we know that.
You see, Angela Davis and the Axis of Indoctrination have trained people like the Squad that they're victims, that America is an eternally racist, sexist hellhole. It is absolutely ridiculous. The efforts of millions of Americans have proven this very simple thing. Hard work wins. You get out of life what you put into it. You cannot control the outcome, but you are 100% in control of the effort. And before you bitch, moan, and whine about what somebody did to you, maybe, just maybe, you ought to stroll to the nearest mirror, take a look at it, and say to yourself, what could I have done to change the outcome? And finally, no matter how hard you work, bad things are going to happen. How you respond to those bad things will tell whether or not you have integrity. I'm Larry Elder, and we've got a country to save. I will see you next time.